I think that there's a huge obligation that is sometimes understated in our culture to family that needs to take on more than just being physically there, but maybe even more so being
even more emotionally available.
And I think it's so tragic.
I think it's kind of in our culture, as we think about it, sometimes it's always your parents know what's going on, they're right, kids don't really, there's a gerontocracy, right, where the older comes first. And children, often their emotional lives is not something that I think that we pay attention to a lot. Just do what you're supposed to do, and do your study, get that, do well. That's what matters, and in this situation, unfortunately, but I think our extended family network buffers for it, right? If you can't talk to your parents, you could talk to your cousin, you could talk to your auntie, you could talk to somebody at school. But the same family now in America, it doesn't work.
It does, yes.
Because the extended family network is not there. So that format of don't talk to mom, dad, see daddy run away, that kind of thing, in America or whatever, it's problematic because the things that they go through, they didn't have anyone to express it and process it with. And therefore you start seeing the consequence of unprocessed trauma in these kids. And even for Lashade herself, she too had a similar thing where because of her family background, she didn't have an extended network supporting her. So she herself was kind of already a traumatized parent.
For her, she's just floating.
Right.
And she's just floating. She doesn't really have any grounding anywhere.
The thing that I think the author really wants to show is how that having one lens of your existence and being is how that might not be healthy. Whereas kids don't necessarily have that problem where they're grabbing onto something as like, this is who I am kind of thing. I think that's when I talk about the lack of resilience of adulthood sometimes, is that we find these things to peg ourselves to, and then when they're not there, what do we do? The mother, two things about adulthood lenses that I thought was really interesting, and at least Ghana must go. The father has a cameraman. Do you notice that in the text?
Yes.
He's a cameraman.
Like he's putting on a show the whole time.
Thank you. It's like a show. It's like, who am I supposed to be?
It's like an imaginary cameraman.
I think it's in his head.
Right.
It's in his head.
It is in his head.
It's an imaginary show.
It's definitely in his head. But I think that the Taiye Selasi is doing this on purpose to talk about how adults live in a way that has a cameraman saying, what am I supposed to be? Not like, who am I? How do I feel?
Is this
ideal me that a cameraman is filming? And then when it's not that, then I don't know how to exist. I don't know who to be anymore. And the wife, I think, has an attitude about that to herself too. Like, I am the wife of this great man. My husband leaves, and who am I? Like, I don't know who I am.
Yeah, because she forfeited her own sort of
identity.
As a psychiatrist, right? And when you're dealing with children and adolescents, right? And maybe some of these issues of sexual abuse, verbal abuse, and all these other things. What tends to be some of the effects that you notice that happens on, let's say, their identity, their sense of self, their sense of confidence, and all those things that people need to sort of like feel secure, to have normal, well-adjusted lives.
Right. Well, I thought that she did a really good job in terms of capturing some of the consequences that we see when kids have trauma that was not treated. And oftentimes when there's trauma, you see consequences such as like emotional issues, psychological issues, cognitive consequences. Right? And some of the psychological consequences that she covered, for example, is kids sometimes developing like depressive symptoms, right?
Like Sadie.
Like Sadie,
Taiye,
Kende had that as well, ended up in the psych ward. He also had something called catatonia, where he's not able to speak and he just kind of freezes. That's a psychological phenomena. And he had a history of like hurting himself. These are things that we sometimes see in kids who are depressed, often, and these are the kind of kids that I see all the time where I work. Also, there's the phenomenon when people are being traumatized, that as they're going through the trauma and they're trying to escape it, they dissociate. Their their mind believes what's happening to them, so
Yeah.
that they don't fully sort of be present and witness it.
Yeah.
Which I think Taiwo, she painted that scene of how when she was being sexually abused, the way she dealt with it was to pretend that she was flying.
She wasn't, yes.
And she wasn't there.
Yes.
That's association.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Which then oftentimes people who have that kind of stuff are prone to maybe multiple personalities. The sense of identity is not really clear.
Yep.
And we see that later on in terms of her dysregulated relationships, in terms of like dealing with men.
Yes.
Later on. And then there's also people who develop like emotional numbing. They just are not able to really fully emotionally connect to people, express their feelings clearly, which their older brother Olu had.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I thought
yeah.
it was very powerful of her that in these different kids, she showed us different consequences of untreated trauma.
Untreated trauma.
And she did that
Yeah.
so beautifully
Yeah.
in a way that, I mean, as I was reading, I could tell, like, oh, this is what this was.
Yeah.
But I thought she did that really kind of well.
Yeah.
And also the issue of intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
There's often type of trauma where it starts in one generation, it continues to the next generation, it continues to the next generation. Folashade's issue, it started with her parents.
Yes.
You know, and then it went to her,
Yeah.
and her not having a sense of self, a sense of self-integrity.
Yeah.
You see then happening with her kids.
Yeah.
And the kids all have their own problems.
Yeah, because
right?
for Folashade, it was never treated.
It was never treated. Now you can
Yeah.
imagine this, you know, Kende with his depression and the cutting, you know, Taiwo with her dissociative behavior, Olu with the numbing,
Yeah.
Shidi with the eating disorder,
Yeah.
right? She's bulimic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Obsessed with her body.
Yeah.
So you can imagine if that's not addressed in that generation, how that would also then sort of continue.
Continue down the line
Absolute-
with when they
down
have
the
their
line.
own when
Right.
they have their own kids.
When they have their own.
Is it that it's only fixed when it's treated? So we see Taiwo seeing a psychiatrist who's kind of treating her pro bono, maybe as just sort of like this experimental thing, right? But it doesn't seem like she's getting anywhere.
Well, I think you see different types of what happens, right? She kind of quasi sat in a few sessions. We don't know where it's going.
True.
Kende looked like somebody actually got him better.
Yes.
Right? And it looks like, I don't think Olu ever was in treatment for anything.
No,
And
yeah.
they don't mention Sadie having her eating disorder addressed.
No.
So
no.
different things kind of happen in terms of how people address these issues. I mean, there are people who never seek treatment and they do get better. They're resilient. They
Yeah.
are able to overcome it against all odds.
Yeah.
And you hear that happens, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there are people, it's not a one shoe fit all.
Yeah.
I think different people have different trajectory and you can't predict it. What I do say is if someone is showing that they're showing serious problems and other people see it, it might suggest that they get help versus saying, well, it's just going to go away. You know, because in these kids, which is, you know, Folashade not knowing what's going on with her children, right?
Yeah.
She does not know that the kids have all this problems. She
Problems,
has
yeah.
no clue.
Yeah, whatsoever.
You know, no clue at all.
Yeah.